Hello everyone and welcome to Doom Bible. Today is a big day. You won't want to miss the second half of this video. We are tackling some of the biggest mysteries in Doom's history. Like, what is the true origin of the Doomslayer? Did Davoth create him, or was he born naturally? Why does he look so identical to Davoth? If Davoth created him, why was he born on Earth instead of Hell? While these questions haven't been officially answered, we have a theory that connects all the missing pieces. One that makes perfect sense within the Doom storyline. Stick around to hear it. But for the first half of the video, let's pick up where we left off. Previously, we saw Samar Maykrs steal the Father's essence from Urdak and place it in the Ingmar Sanctum. An act of desperation to protect it from Hell's growing threat. This decision came at a massive cost. Without the Father's essence, the Maykrs could no longer create a new Khan. That meant the current Khan Maker had to live for billions of years with no way to stop the inevitable transfiguration. Desperate for a solution, the Maykrs turned to ancient relics, seeking the lost source of Wraith energy. Their search spanned eons until they finally discovered the legendary land of Argent D'Nur. Now let's briefly uncover the history of Argent D'Nur, from the time before the Maykrs arrived to the moment their presence changed everything. Thanks for watching. My AI voice will take it from here.
After billions of years had passed since the start of this universe, the Wraiths breathed life into the land of Argent D'Nur. Non-human creatures lived there. Then, many millions of years later, the Argenta people, human beings born on this land, worshipped the Wraiths as their creators. Before the Argenta people were united, they endured many years of bloody battles among themselves, and with many human and non-human creatures, until they finally united the land. A similar thing was also happening on Earth, though still in its earlier stages of life. Agadon hunters, non-human creatures, were born there, but humans had not yet been born. By reading the Codex, we learned that the Father in the past took at least one Wraith crystal to Earth to power the Gate of Davoth. Knowing that the Father created humans on Earth, it possibly meant that the Father carried the Wraith energy to Earth as a seed for life, just like what happened in Argent D'Nur. With Argenta people now living on Argent D'Nur as a single nation, they crowned their first king, or Mero the Father. They had formed two distinct organizations. First, a religious entity responsible for paying tribute to the Wraiths and appeasing their tempestuous hunger, known as the Order of the Deeg. Second, a military force responsible for protecting the Wraiths, called the Order of the Night Sentinels. For nearly 20 million years, the Sentinel people secured their civilization against the threat of invasion from beasts and humans alike. Although it wasn't mentioned in the Codex, we theorize that the Maykrs, at this point with limited energy left, were searching for the race energy as a potential solution during these hard times. They must have known about its existence, but they seem to have forgotten its exact location after the Father went missing from Urdak, causing the current Maykrs to be disconnected from the memories of the past Maykrs. While Samar Maykr, being the oldest living Maykr and having deep knowledge of the Wraiths and the World Spear's location, likely kept himself away from the current Maykrs, he is suspected of being the heretic who stole the Father's essence from Urdak. In the time of grief, when King Etrex took the throne, the Maykrs finally located the Wraith's land. The Argenta people saw it as a blessing. White porcelain beings from another world brought gifts to Argent D'Nur. The Codex entries explain every detail about the relationship between the Argenta people and the Maykrs. Both parties were happy about building this new relationship. The Maykrs could utilize Wraith energy for their cause, while the Argenta people advanced their capabilities thanks to the Maykrs' help. During the reign of King Danak, the Argenta people, with the blessing of the Maykrs, became highly advanced in technology. They built ships, Giant mechs, fortresses like the Fortress of Doom, learned teleportation technology, and more. They conquered many planets across galaxies throughout the universe, delivering the Maykrs' blessing. They even reached Mars and Earth. Mars, at that time, was a habitable land. They colonized it and built the legendary city of Davoth. The Order of the Dig also discovered Earth and built an Argenta settlement there. No human life was born there yet, but they found the Agadons. Many millions of years passed, but we know that the Maykrs didn't benefit greatly from Wraith energy, as it couldn't extend their lives or delay transfiguration. Perhaps that's why they wanted the Sentinels to continue expanding until they could find something more helpful. Before we end this chapter, while the universe was in a stable situation, a new incoming threat began to rise against the Maykrs. Davoth was devising his final plan, which he knew could not only take down the Maykrs, but also bring about his own downfall. However, in his hatred for the Maykrs, he didn't care about himself, he only cared about his revenge. In the first chapter, we foreshadowed an arcane project that was perhaps cancelled and deemed a failure, as it never resulted in creating different immortal beings. Instead, it was able to create a being identical to Davoth, like a twin. Davoth cancelled the project as it never served his purpose. On the contrary, this twin, if created, could rival Davoth himself, which is why he wasn't interested in proceeding with it. However, after he suffered his ultimate loss against the Father and the Maykrs, he ordered his minions to bring this project to life again. Davoth's followers may have advised against this plan, as it could potentially spiral out of control. Remember, if this plan was implemented and an identical Davoth was successfully created, no one could predict what path or goals he would have. He might not choose to stand against the Maykrs. Perhaps he would even choose to stand with the Maykrs against Hell, or he might refuse to align with any party and instead choose to live peacefully, away from all past conflicts. This is why such a plan doesn't guarantee anything, but Davoth ordered its implementation anyway. He would write a master plan to convince this twin to join his side, or at the very least, fight the Maykrs. Let's name this identical twin as the Destroyer. But how would this plan be implemented? Continuing this theory, creating a 100% identical being to Davoth is no easy job. Many difficult steps would be required. First, find a powerful bloodline that could host the spirit of Davoth. Second, if the bloodline proved worthy, an identical twin of Davoth would be born. Third, awaken the powers of the new Davoth. If he were successfully born, his powers might be dormant, only to awaken through physical contact with Davoth. Now, Davoth ordered his loyalists to find all potential bloodlines that could be worthy to bring the Destroyer to life. He commanded them to search everywhere, especially in Argent D'Nur. But let's assume the Destroyer was born. How could they ensure he makes physical contact with Davoth while he is sealed in Ingmor's sanctum? Remember, when the Father sealed Davoth in the form of a life sphere, he took an element of Davoth's body back to Urdak. If the Destroyer successfully made physical contact with it, his power would awaken. But how could Davoth's minions reach Urdak in the first place? They had already failed numerous times over the past billions of years. We can find a clear answer to this question in the Codex of the Ancient Gods Part 2. It is revealed that Davoth is planning to influence the current Khan Maykr to take the element out of Urdak and move it to a reachable place. With this plan set to be implemented, Davoth's loyalists set out to find a powerful bloodline that could potentially host the Destroyer, while Davoth himself began influencing the current Khan Maykr to serve his plan. Now the theory ends here, back to the Codex. But let's first ask ourselves, how was Davoth able to influence the current Khan Maykr? If we read the Codex, we find the answer. Davoth had the ability to influence whoever was susceptible to corruption. But why was the Khan Maykr susceptible to corruption in the first place? This is not answered in the Codex, but perhaps it was because the current Khan had already lived for more than 10,000 years and had started to suffer minor transfiguration, which slowly made her more susceptible to corruption. Here's another question. How far could Davoth influence the current Khan? For example, could Davoth influence her to serve hell altogether? We wouldn't find an answer to this question in the Codex either, but it seems evident that Davoth's influence on the current Khan was quite limited. He could only sway her on ideas that she found plausible or convincing. With all this information, let's examine how Davoth's plan laid the groundwork for the arrival of the destroyer. His plan was as follows. First, the destroyer must be born among the Argenta people, given the Maykrs' strong relationship with them at the time. Second, convince the Khan Maykr to bring the destroyer into contact with his element. Third, to persuade the Khan Maykr, Davoth planted a true vision of the future, foretelling that a destroyer from within the Argenta people would bring about the end of Urdak. Driven by fear of this prophecy, the Khan would be more easily manipulated into believing the solution was to identify the destroyer by allowing potential warriors of the Sentinels to come into contact with his element. Fourth, influence her to construct a machine using his element, convincing her that this divinity machine would detect the destroyer. In truth, this machine would serve as a link between Davoth and his identical counterpart, the destroyer. Finally, after successfully manipulating the Khan Maykr and completing the creation of the divinity machine, the only remaining step would be to bring the destroyer to life. But the question remains, will Davoth's loyalists discover a worthy bloodline capable of bringing an identical Davoth into existence? Are the Sentinels a worthy bloodline to host the destroyer, or would they be deemed unworthy and a failure? Could the future humans on Earth be worthy? What about the legendary bloodline of B.J. Blazkowicz and Commander Keen? Could their descendants prove to be worthy? If the destroyer were to be born far in the future on Earth, how would Davoth move him to Argent D'Nur? Would Davoth wait that long? Could he find a way to bring the destroyer back in time from the far future? In the next chapter, we'll delve deeper into Project Eternal, connecting classic Doom and current Doom lore. Stay tuned.